John Karras, the third man. I'm Randy Credico. This is Randy Credico live on the fly. As we today reach the one-year anniversary of the crisis in Ukraine. Some people call it an invasion. Other people call it an incursion. We'll have people today that will say it was a military operation, a special one. But whatever. It's 1 year today, and matters are getting worse, I'll be honest with you. There's a lot of talk about F-14s being sent. A whole bunch of congressmen have signed this letter. Can you imagine if they sent F-14s? Well, we'll be talking to two people today who I saw this week at the UN Security Council meeting, along with my co-host today, Joe Lauria from Consortium News, and that is Ray McGovern, the former CIA official, and also with, and he's been here a few times before, Dmitri Polyanskiy, an envoy, first deputy permanent mission to the UN from Russia. So I know, and I get heat for that. You know, everyone wants me to do what you see on CNN and MSNBC. So I say to them, instead of listening to this show, put it on MSNBC and CNN and watch Ali Velshi, Jake Tapper, and the rest of them say the same thing. All right? So today, I want to play this one clip here. This is something that was really annoying that I saw. This is from ABC News. They're talking about, there's a reporter there promoting the burning of Russian books. Take a listen to this.
Hi, I'm Patrick Reevell with ABC News, and we're here in Kyiv, and we're at a paper recycling plant here. And the reason we're here is that we're watching hundreds of Russian books about to be pulped. You can see these men are chucking them into this chute, and then they will go up there and be pulped. There's really all types of books here. We've just seen him throw several volumes of Tolstoy, as well as the books here about the Soviet victory in World War II, there's books about the Soviet tanks. Basically, this is part of an initiative by a bookshop in the center of Kyiv, where people can voluntarily bring Russian books they no longer want in their homes to be recycled, and say that they're not simply destroying books, that they will be recycled and turned into something, in their words, more useful. But obviously, this is a pretty powerful symbol of Ukraine's rejection of Russian culture.
Same thing seems to be happening here. So it's going around, folks, book burning. Let's play some Barry Maguire, and then we're off and running with Joe Lauria and Ray McGovern.
The Eastern world, it is exploding, violence flaring, bullets loading. You're old enough to kill, but not for voting. You don't believe in war, but what's that gun you're toting? And even the Jordan River has bodies floating. But you tell me over and over and over again, my friend, you don't believe we're on the eve of destruction. Don't you understand what I'm trying to say? Can't you feel the fears I'm feeling today? If the button is pushed, there's no running away. There'll be no one to save with the world in a grave. Take a look around you, boy. It's bound to scare you, boy. And you tell me over and over and over again, my friend, you don't believe we're on the eve of destruction.
Joe Lauria, who spent 25 years covering the UN. Joe, it was really an incredible day the other day, Wednesday. You'd never been in through that route.
Only once before, when I interviewed one of the presidents of the Security Council.
I see.
From Nicaragua. But yes, that's off limits for the press.
All right. Well, why don't you introduce the individual? You know him. You're friends with Ray. Give us
Yeah. By the way, that song's probably the more relevant than when it was first written. And I think you should keep playing it. I know Ray McGovern several years now, since I became editor-in-chief of Consortium News in April of 2018, coming up on 5 years. Ray was very close to Bob Perry, of course, the founder of Consortium News, in 1995. And Ray formed Veterans, or helped, was one of the founders of Veterans Intelligence Professionals for Sanity. And they published their memos in Consortium News. And Ray refers to Bob as his mentor. And Ray began writing for Consortium News back then and has contributed from an intelligence point of view. But to see him there in the Security Council was quite something. I don't know if he knew what he was walking himself into, frankly, Randy.
All right. Well, why don't you start? Ray, are you there?
I am.
All right. So you heard that nice intro by my good friend and your good friend Joe. Well, we were both there to watch you the other day, and I want to get your thoughts about what it was like and your feeling when it was over.
Well, as Joe suggested, it was a little bit surreal for me to be there. But, fortified by Bob Perry and the experience that I've had over the last 20 years, I felt like I could speak for the rest of us and try to spread a little truth around. I won't go into what I said. You can see that on my website, raymcgovern.com. What impressed me most was what the Chinese representative said. Now, for those of you who do not know the subject of this briefing, it was Cy Hirsch's bombshell investigative report that it was the U.S. and President Biden personally who approved the blowing up of the Nord Stream pipelines. The Russians had asked for a special Security Council meeting to call for an investigation of this. And to his great credit, Jeffrey Sachs, the professor from Columbia, laid out for 10 minutes what the real situation was, and that the ones that know how this happened, first and foremost, the Swedes, have done their own investigation. And they came up with some results, but you know what? They can't tell us. They can't tell us because it's classified, because it would endanger national security. Believe that? Okay? So, the Swedes haven't done it. Would the Norwegians be interested? No. I said they're one of the perpetrators. How about the Danes? How about the Germans? Nobody's going to do an investigation. So the Russians, to their credit, said, hey, what's the Security Council of the United Nations for if they're not going to investigate clearly an act of war? And the only answer that came through that made any sense was the Chinese representative saying, well, I think Russia has that right. I think that's correct. Are we not up to investigating this in the United Nations Security Council? So, in other words, when you say that the U.S. has isolated Russia, right? Well, you can believe that if you like, But if you look at what the Ukrainian imbroglio has catalyzed, namely the division of the world, you have the lily white West embodied in NATO on the one side, and you have, people of color, let's say, 1.4 billion Chinese, 1.4 billion Indians, Indonesians, Brazilians, Iranians. You have all kinds of people on the other side. And I'm sorry, but that represents like 70 to 80% of the world. Not in the Security Council, mind you, but in the world. Now, this is the anniversary of the invasion. The invasion took me by surprise. And I have to tell you that the main reason the invasion took me by surprise is because I didn't know two things. Didn't know that the Ukrainian forces had been trained up to NATO standards and that they were assembled across from the Donbass area, Lugansk and Donetsk, and were about to attack and make short shrift of the Russian speakers there. I didn't know that. Who did know that? The Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe knew that. They had inspectors there. They were tracing the artillery shell. They knew that. And eventually, Vladimir Putin knew that. What I also didn't know is that China would support something that flew in the face of their cardinal, their principled foreign policy stance, which is no invasion of other countries. You know, the principles of Westphalia sovereignty is sovereign and sacred, okay? Now, what did Xi Jinping give Vladimir Putin on the 4th of February, so 20 days before the invasion? What did he give Putin? He gave him a waiver. He said, all right, I understand. You're right. They're after you now. They'll be after us next. So we'll give you a waiver on Westphalia, and we will say core interests prevail here, and each country should be able to respond to its own specific set of circumstances. Even Chinese propaganda changed that tune to that, the latest thing. Each country should be able to do their own thing, and it should be, as they put it, it should be weighed on its merits. So this is just preparatory to saying, what has happened in the year since? Well, this is big. We have a virtual military alliance between Russia and China. China, on Monday, put out a paper that you wouldn't believe. The paper is titled U.S. Hegemony and Its Perils. It is striking because it's so direct and blunt. The Chinese usually don't speak in this language. And they name names and they challenge the U.S. directly. I think it signals a shift, at least in the tone of Chinese policy.
Right.
This is the first time that China has called out the U.S. so directly and systematically in an official paper. The title itself speaks for itself, U.S. Hegemony and Its Perils. So what's the bottom line here? Bottom line is, in my view, if Russia gets involved in a dust-up with the U.S., NATO, if you will, in Europe, you can fully expect a dust-up in the South China, the East China Sea, or in the Taiwan Straits. It's a two-front situation, and Putin himself has called the notion that the U.S. policymakers would take on China and Russia at the same time. He has called it in undiplomatic terms, quote, crazy, end quote, and I share that view.
All right. We only have about 12 minutes left, Ray, so we want to get in as many questions as possible. Joe, go ahead.
Well, where to begin? There were 60,000 Ukrainian troops on the Donbass poised to invade, but if you looked at maps in American and European newspapers, all you saw were the Russian troops on the other side of the border. It was sort of like a chessboard with only the black pieces. And they've continuously suppressed the entire history from 2014. And this is very, very worrying, obviously, because if you try to talk about that context, that's when you're smeared. That's the only response they have, is that you're somehow a Russian agent, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And we know that you have been a Russian agent a long time. Ray, no, I'm kidding. You've been an American agent for a long time. I want to ask you about, though, the actual meeting that you were at. Rosemary DiCarlo, who was the deputy American ambassador when I was last at the UN in 2015. She's a professional civil servant, diplomat, not a neocon, and a little bit more reasonable than some of the political appointees that come through there. And yet now she's the Undersecretary General for political affairs. So it's a senior position. She works for the UN, not for the U.S. government anymore. But even she had to put a damper on this and saying we're not going to speculate about this, essentially saying the UN is UN Secretariat is not interested in an investigation. Of course, if the Council voted to have one, they'd have to do it. But she didn't seem so keen on that. My feeling is, Ray, that Sweden, Denmark, Norway, Germany's investigations will go on for a very long time. And if they ever end, they're going to say it's inconclusive. We can't say who blew up the pipeline. Is that how you feel about it?
Well, Joe, I associate myself with your views on that. You've been right about this all along. I suspect that's what will happen. The other thing is that I think corroboration will come in the sense of reinforcing what Cy Hirsch has said. More people will come out of the woodwork. Oh, yeah, I watched those deep-sea divers train. Oh, yeah, we are. So I think that it's going to be increasingly impossible for the mainstream press to resist or to overlook this. Witness the fact that just 2 days ago, the New York Times, of all people, the New York Times had an article on the Security Council session that I participated in, and they included a live link to Cy Hirsch's piece. Now, that was 2 weeks late. Better late than never. So people are going to be able to realize what Cy is saying. And once they look at his record, I think they will be persuaded.
Right, Ray, you really touched on the most crucial aspect of this Ukraine war. This is not some ordinary conflict. We've got two sides here that we're going to refuse to lose. And it's really the fate of maybe humanity really rests here. Russia has accelerated a process that was happening where, as you said, the majority of the world, India, China, Africa, Latin America, have developed their own commercial, financial, monetary system. That's being developed right now that cuts the U.S. and Europe out. And they're the last ones to know about it. That the West is actually on the outside looking in now. And if they do realize that, what's at stake here, I can't see either side backing down. How could we get out of this incredibly dangerous crisis, Ray?
Only if Biden gets some adults in the room. His advisors are illusionary. They're benighted. They think they're exceptional. They come from the best schools, Joe. They're the same kind of professional elite. We call them the best and the brightest that got us into Vietnam, killed 3 million Vietnamese, 58,000 U.S. soldiers. It's the same breed. Now, how do we change that? My God, we have to start spreading the truth around, and we have to make sure that we put our bodies into it. It's getting pretty late, you know. Dr. King said there is such a thing as too late. It is getting too late, but there are enough of us, especially with this latest report from Cy Hirsch, to tell the truth about what's going on there. The real problem is this. Biden says Russia's got to lose, and we have to avoid World War III. Well, Russia has all the conventional capability of moving Russian forces to the Dnieper River and farther west. Okay? They are going to win. So what is Biden going to do now? Is he going to resist the impulse to use these little tactical nuclear weapons? They're no bigger than the ones over Hiroshima. Yeah, well, is he going to resist the temptation to do that? Or is he going to kind of say, well, all right, maybe this is far enough, maybe we deal. The Dnieper is clear. That divides Ukraine in two. There are the makings of a settlement there. It just will take the Russian army to go all the way up there before the U.S. might come to its senses. If it does not come to its senses, the only alternative to not losing this war for the U.S. and Ukraine is the use of nuclear weapons. That's where they might come into play.
But there are a bunch of steps before we'd get there. For example, giving them F-16s, which came up in March of last year, and Blinken said we're thinking of it, and Biden said no way, the Pentagon stopped that. Now it's back on the table being discussed, and there would have to be more tanks than they're going to send, and maybe Polish troops intervening, not as a NATO force. I mean, there would be many steps before we got to nuclear weapons, wouldn't you say, Ray?
Yes, but we're talking not in 5-year terms here. We're talking about in, I'd say, about a year. So
yeah.
The dichotomy here is, or the self-contradiction is, you can't have a Russian defeat and avoid World War III. And that may play out only in 2 or 3 more months, but it's coming soon, and we have to realize that the more so since the Chinese are in on this, and they're going to do a dust-up in the East, mark my words, if the Russians get into trouble.
Right. You're listening to WBAI. This is Randy Critical, and the show is Randy Critical live on the fly here in Brooklyn. And it's this kind of programming. You will not hear, Ray, the kind of programming that you hear at WBAI. Can you tell us what you think the importance of a station like this continuing? We got Ray?
Oh, you asking me?
Yes.
God. Well, Randy, you're the only show in town, for God's sake. I mean, you're the only one that pursued the Julian Assange story, going over there and talking to him and being with him and encouraging him. So, my applause is very genuine for what you've done, how you've not backed down from being a mediator, from letting Russians talk on air. My goodness, that used to be possible. No longer is it possible, except for people watching live on the fly.
The question is, how important is it? Because we are at a financial crisis juncture ourselves, and some people donate, others don't. That's the question I wanted to ask you.
Well, I don't think you're going to get any money from George Soros. You're not going to get any money from the folks that fund NPR or CBS. It's up to us. It's us little people. Now, we don't have but $100, $200, but if we all chipped in, people like you could stay on the air despite the rather serious obstacles to running the truth, to telling the truth and spreading some truth around.
We got time for one more question, Joe, and then we're going to have Dmitri Polyanskiy on at the bottom of the hour here. Okay, so Joe.
So, Ray, what you seem to be saying is the only way that the U.S. administration can be pushed away from bringing us to the brink is for enough sustained and massive demonstrations in the street. And I point back to the Vietnam era, which was not one demonstration or two, but many over many years. We know the example of when 1 million people were in the streets in London, and I don't know how many in New York, and all over the world to try to prevent the invasion of Iraq in 2003, and it failed because that was only one massive demonstration. And the U.S. would, without a Security Council resolution, and to see the hypocrisy of the U.S. at the Security Council is just extraordinary, talking about invading another country unprovoked. Of course, the U.S. was not provoked, and Iraq was thousands of miles away from the U.S. and did not threaten the U.S. in any way, where Ukraine is right on the border there, and we know what happened from 2014 and the way Russia feels about it. So what do you say about a call out that we need demonstrations? I think that's pretty desperate in my view. That's the last line of defense. The people have to get out and tell the administration, change your policy, negotiate, end this war, even if it means Ukraine losing some territory. It's got to end.
That's right, Joe. And if you look at Germany, for example, there are really big demonstrations nationwide scheduled for Saturday. This will be big. Saturday, I think, is the 25th. Anyhow, what does the Germans have at stake here? Well, they have a Chancellor Scholz, who stood at the next podium next to President Biden when Biden said we're going to have the capability of making Nord Stream not work. Trust me, we can do it. Now, the journalist who had the guts to ask Biden then asked Scholz, what do you think about that? And Scholz said, we do everything together. We plan these things together. There's nothing we in the West do without doing it together. Okay. Now, all the German people have to do is get up and say, Chancellor Scholz, did you do the Nord Stream pipeline destruction together? Or were you deceived by the President of the United States? Did he not tell you on the 7th of February that they had already determined they had the capability to do that? And they were waiting until September. Now, why September? I think Joe Lauria, you have the right insight on that one. You said, whoa, what did Putin say in early September? He said, okay, all you have to do, you Germans and the rest of the Europeans, is knock off the sanctions, and the gas will flow.
Yeah.
Now, that was two weeks before 2 weeks before the explosion. So, post hoc ergo propter hoc can be a fallacy, but I think I think people can understand. Well, he waited, that is, Biden waited, until it looked like the Germans were actually negotiating with the Russians, which they were at the time, and that the whole thing could fall apart. So,
all right, Sie machen alles zusammen.
All right,
zusammen.
Gentlemen,
All together.
we do have our special envoy waiting. We're going to take Ray, thank you very much, and that was really an incredible speech that you delivered. I hope cooler heads prevail. Listen to what you had to say, and perhaps we could save this planet. Ray McGovern, it's always a pleasure to have you on this show. Thank you for all that you do. We'll be right back. Okay, that is Dmitri Shostakovich. I'm sure any day now, along with the books that are being pulped in Kiev, they'll be throwing away and destroying records of Tchaikovsky, Shostakovich, Rimsky-Korsakov, and others. Joining us right now, as promised, is the first deputy permanent representative to the UN from Russia, Dmitri Polyanskiy. Welcome back to the show, Mr. Polyanskiy.
Hello, Randy. Glad to hear you.
Good to hear you. I don't know if you saw that report on ABC News that they were collecting and destroying Russian books. We played a clip earlier in this show. Are you aware of that?
No, I'm not. I'm not watching ABC News. I'm not watching Western media at all.
Neither am I. Neither am I. I'm just saying I saw it on Twitter, a clip of it. So you can see it without going to the station itself. But at any rate, today marks the 1 year anniversary. Is there a lot of action going on at the UN?
Oh, there was heck of an action really during this week. You know that initially in January, the Ukrainians announced that there will be kind of a peace summit, but they didn't explain what it meant. They only said that this would be without Russia and hinted that it would be a kind of trial of Russia. I don't know where they took all this information, because what we had now, we had several meetings, in fact, but no summit. So it was a General Assembly meeting, special General Assembly meeting. Today there was a Security Council meeting devoted to the anniversary, and there were a lot of high-level guests speaking same things and repeating that Russia must surrender and all these things. So actually a lot of action, a lot of words. There was also this meeting on Nord Stream. I think that you were speaking about this already at the moment when I joined. There was also a meeting about relations between United Nations and European Union, which turned out to be largely devoted also to the situation around Ukraine. So we had to prepare 4 statements this week, 4 days. This is unprecedented. If you call this action, yes, there was action. Well, there was also, I forgot to mention, there was also a resolution which was adopted by the General Assembly. It was not a surprise. They were working on it for a long time, and the level of ambitions was becoming less and less. So the text was, of course, very toothless and very general, because they wanted, the Western countries wanted to have the biggest number of votes possible, the biggest figure of support, and they still didn't manage to get the threshold that it was a year ago. so they are a bit disappointed, I guess. And again, there was this blackmailing and hands twisting and threatening of countries that didn't want to vote in the way they want them to vote. So that was the action.
A lot of action.
In the United Nations.
A lot of action.
Yeah.
Well, can you explain to people, you hear these commentators on all of the mainstream media outlets, they keep calling it an invasion. Others will call it an incursion. And we hear from you it's a special military operation. Can you explain to the listeners the difference?
Yes, sure. So there is no all-in-all war against Russia and Ukraine. And it's quite clear from the way how we conduct military action. So we are not at war with Ukrainian people. We are conducting special military operation against Kiev regime, and this is a big difference. So we are, in fact, started this military operation to stop the war that was unleashed by Ukraine against the citizens of the east of this country, against Russian-speaking population, 9 years ago, in 2014. And that was the main task of the special military operation. There are certain things that we want to achieve. We want, first and foremost, to have at our borders a normal, peace-loving neighbor that is not a threat to us anymore. We don't want to see people being killed, children, women, elderly being killed by Ukrainian shelling in peaceful cities, and this was continuing for 8 years without any attention from the West. We don't want to see the rebirth of neo-Nazism on our borders. We don't want to see swastikas. We don't want to see all these ugly things. And basically, that's it. We don't want to have I don't know, a hornet's nest on our border, a Russophobic hornet's nest. We want to see the rights of Russian-speaking population, which is actually the majority of population of Ukraine, the rights respected, and that these people shouldn't be forced to abandon their Russian identity. They shouldn't be forced to believe in the version of history that is far from truth. They will not be forced to worship former Nazi criminals and collaborators. That's it in a nutshell. So it's not an all-in-all war. We do not destroy cities like the United States was doing in Iraq, in Libya, in other places. We are very moderate in our response. We are making very precision strikes, and the casualties that you would see in peaceful cities and peaceful areas, they are largely because of the fact that Ukrainians are placing in breach of international humanitarian law, that they are placing heavy weaponry in the cities, in residential areas, including air defense systems. So if they were waging the war in the way that is prescribed by international humanitarian law, of course the numbers of casualties would be much less. But they are doing what they are doing, and the West is covering them, and they are trying to present the picture of Russia destroying Ukraine. For example, today in our speech at Security Council, we tried to debunk several myths that are being promoted by the West, and it was quite clear, for example, from the statement of Foreign Secretary Blinken. He was saying that Ukraine is a victim, Russia is an aggressor. So we asked him a question: so how come that your victim has its hands in blood and its hands are in Nazi tattoos all over? So how come that you do not mention the fact that this your victim started the war against its own civilian population in Donbass, and you were silent about it? How come? So Ukraine is not a victim, and portraying it as a victim is really contrary to the common sense and to the historic truth. There is also one other myth that is being promoted by Western countries, is that if Ukraine stops fighting, there will be no Ukraine. It's not true. If Ukraine stops fighting, then there will be another Ukraine, peaceful Ukraine, without neo-Nazis, hopefully Ukraine without the criminal Zelensky regime, but it's up to Ukrainian people to decide what to do. And Ukraine that is not threatening its own people, its own Russian-speaking population, and its neighbors like Russia. So nobody is saying, nobody has said that Russia's aim was to destroy Ukraine and to de-Ukrainize Ukraine, to introduce Russian language. There was never such an objective of our special military operation. And then comes also the understanding that we would be ready at any moment to stop, to sit and to negotiate, provided we will be able to achieve the goals of our special military operation that I already enumerated by peaceful means. That would be our preferred scenario, and we were very close to this scenario last March or April when Ukrainians asked about negotiations, and they themselves presented a vision of how the peace would look like. This was a good basis for possible peace treaty. But then Washington and London intervened, and they prevented Zelensky to conclude any negotiations with Russia, saying that he should fight until the last Ukrainian, because Ukraine is a front of democracy and it's fighting for the whole free world, and all this blah blah blah, as you know better than myself. And that's how that's why the special military operation is going on. That's why people are dying in Ukraine. A lot of Ukrainians are being used as cannon fodder. So the number of victims is really incredible, and I'm absolutely sure that when the world will know the exact number, people will be absolutely shocked by this, and people in Ukraine will be absolutely shocked by this. So Zelensky is throwing absolutely unprepared, innocent people into this fire of war because he wants to serve Western interests as a pawn. And this is tragic. We would be ready to stop this tragedy, but it's not that we would be ready to stop the things that we were doing. Fighting for the rights of the population, of Russian-speaking population, and defending Russian-speaking population, defending their life to live first and foremost.
As you said,
that's it in a nutshell.
Yes, as you said, I was there Tuesday watching that Security Council meeting, and joining me there is my special co-host today, Joe Lauria, and I know he has a few questions for you.
Yes, you get a very good summary of what your ambassador said today at the Security Council with great detail, and yet it seems as if he was speaking in a vacuum or in a tunnel, or no one even seems to have registered what he was saying. And instead we get just slogans and accusations and blame 100% on Russia in this very complex conflict right now. I wonder if you privately in discussions get a sense that at least some of the people on the other side, in the U.S. Side, the West, that they do understand what the reality is about Donetsk and Luhansk, about the 8-year war against the people, Russian speakers in the East, who were resisting a coup d'etat in 2014. They have to know all those facts. The Western media actually reported all that back then, the existence of neo-Nazis in the coup and the war that took place. And now that's just totally erased from the airwaves, from the newspapers in Europe and in the United States, which is a very chilling idea. But have you gotten any sense that that side understands what the reality are, and they're just under a lot of pressure not to say anything? I know the Americans are promoting this, but what about all these other countries that are in the American orbit that don't have any courage really to speak out and say, well, wait a minute, this isn't all true. We have to talk about what the facts were in leading up to this, to the development of a year ago. And that is all that your ambassador said today, and it was totally ignored in a sense I couldn't believe.
Well, it's a good question, of course, how our statements and our positions influence the wider UN membership. I wouldn't say that it wasn't mentioned, it wasn't noticed. No, it was. Even our former Western partners were listening attentively. I watched the faces. I saw that Secretary Blinken's face twisted several times, and he was shaking head, not agreeing with what my ambassador was saying. Other ministers also were highly disappointed by what they listened. But actually, privately, of course, there are two categories. I would say there are three categories of our partners in the UN. There is the most numerous category are the countries that are very well understanding what it is all about, what is happening, what is at stake, what are the root causes of this crisis, and they also have a vision of how this crisis should end. But these countries are not powerful. These countries have their own weak points economically, politically, and they have some strings attached also that are being pulled by Western countries. That's why they can't afford themselves clear expression of their position, but privately they really support us, and they say that they very much admire how we behave during these days, and some of them even wish us to be more resolute and more successful at the battlefield to end all these things as soon as possible. Right. This is the biggest category.
Let me ask you.
There are also,
sorry, I want to ask you a follow-up. There were two allegations made during the meeting today, and one of them was Blinken saying that tens of thousands of civilians have been killed by Russia. Now, the OSCE puts out periodically statistics on civilian deaths, and I don't even think it's reached 10,000 yet. Last time I looked was 8,000. It's probably too low. It's higher than that. Both sides are shooting in this war. Both sides are going to be killing civilians, not just one side. And the Americans probably killed 8,000 civilians in the first week in Iraq and killed hundreds of thousands after that. And the other allegation we heard from several foreign ministers at the table today was that Russia has abducted thousands of children from the Ukrainian families and kidnapped them and brought them back to Russia. Can you address both of those issues, please?
Sure. As far as children are concerned, we repeatedly explained that this is all false and this is a lie. We have a special. We have special people dealing with this issue, and what is usually it's all about. This is about the orphans that are from Donetsk, from Lugansk, from some other regions that have recently joined Russian Federation. So these people remained without their parents because of war action, of activities, and that's why we provided opportunity for them to go and stay in Russia. And this is all being monitored. These all children are accessible for all kinds of Russian NGOs, so we are closely monitoring this issue. There is also a big number of people who voluntarily want to move to Russian Federation, and the Ukrainian side usually falsely claims that there are kind of filtration camps and that people are being kidnapped and they being forced to settle in Russia, and they are being de-Ukrainized. This is all absolutely untrue. There are no reasons to believe it this way, and there are proofs otherwise. As far as the number of casualties, well, I frankly don't know the number of civilian casualties, and I think that every life matters. Every death is a tragedy. We always say, and my ambassador also said this during the minute of silence, which he had to declare on all the people who were killed.
It took a long time for everyone to stand up, didn't it?
Yeah, I will explain to you, because there was some kind of bad behavior from Ukrainians. They said that let's stand up and in memory of those killed by Russian aggression.
Right.
First and foremost, he has no right to declare a minute of silence according to the rules of procedure. It's only the prerogative of the President of the Security Council, and the formula that the President of the Security Council would use is absolutely up to the President of the Security Council. He may agree and disagree with the formula proposed by some member states, and not, of course, by a state invited according to the Rule 37, which was the case with Mr. Kuleba. So that's why my ambassador said in the microphone, he insisted that the formula would be changed. So we would call minute of silence in the memory of all those who died in Ukraine in 2014. And everybody was hesitating because, of course, it was premeditated. It was a provocation that was prepared. And so, of course, we didn't allow it to happen, and they had to stand up in the memory of everybody who was killed there.
No,
so
we
that's
had
why it took so long.
Thank you. We had Ray McGovern on just before you, and when he spoke about the Cy-Hirsch story and the blowing up of the pipeline. Russia has a resolution that you've circulated. Will there be a vote on asking the Security Council to request a UN investigation into that? Will you have a vote?
At some point of time, of course, there will be a vote. because there is a resolution, and we are working at the resolution in normal way at expert level. It means that we are asking for everybody to give their opinion on the text and to give their edits and proposals. There were several expert rounds, and during these rounds, the Western countries are not participating. They are saying that they trust the investigation that is ongoing by Denmark, Sweden, and Germany. So they do not participate, but the others, like China, like Brazil, like African countries, they are giving some edits, they are giving some proposals, and we are reflecting them in our text. So at some point of time, we will come to the moment when there will be no more proposals from anybody. I don't know whether the Western countries will change their behavior or not. And then we will, of course, put this resolution to votes, because we think that there should be international investigation. And in fact, this resolution is calling for Secretary General to propose, to present his ideas to the Security Council on how this international investigation should look like. It doesn't set the structure of this investigation. It's up to Secretary General to propose this structure and other technical details of how the experts could work. And even at this stage, the Western countries are already clearly showing who is really behind this sabotage, saying that there is no need in this kind of investigation, that everything is clear, that the United States is not behind it. Why? Because we need to trust the United States, and the United States denied its participation. So the argument are like this, that this very childish logic.
We are talking to Dmitri Polyanskiy, the first deputy permanent representative, Russia to UN. Mr. Polyanskiy, what are the thoughts that your government has over this new push to send F-16s to Ukraine?
Well, we frankly believe that any delivery of arms to Ukrainian, to Kiev regime will prolong the suffering of Ukrainian people, will make more Ukrainians killed as cannon fodder, because any deliveries do not change the overall situation at the front, and step by step, little by little, we still move in the same direction, and this direction is the defeat of Kiev regime. So they can, of course, postpone it. They can win some time, but they can't change this inevitable course of history. Well, I don't want to discuss, frankly, the details. What about F-16s? What about other missile rocket systems? Whatever. It only shows the bigger involvement of Western countries in this conflict. I saw the reports on some websites that some tanks, some sophisticated aircraft, some artillery imply participation of Western soldiers, because the Ukrainians themselves are not capable, are not knowledgeable to use these systems. And this, of course, brings us closer to direct confrontation with the United States, with Western countries, with all the unnecessary consequences for the whole planet. So that's what, of course, worries us very much. We warn our former Western partners about these consequences. So far, they pretend that they are not aware of any such scenario, such possibility, and they have to arm Ukraine, because Ukraine allegedly is a victim. I explained to you our logic why Ukraine isn't a victim. So maybe this vicious circle will stop. If this vicious circle doesn't stop, then of course we will still have to carry out our special military operation to fulfill these goals that I spoke about at the beginning of our interview. This is how it looks 1 year from then.
We've seen how Boris Johnson intervened to stop Ukraine from negotiating with Russia when there was a possible deal back in March or April in Istanbul. And now the former Israeli Prime Minister has said that the U.S. told him not to try to get a peace deal here. So clearly the United States does not want a peace agreement. Now, Russia has until now said that they would negotiate. So has the Russian position changed since that? Is Russia still willing to sit down and talk, or have the war aims changed from those that were explained by President Putin on this day 1 year ago in his speech to the Russian nation?
No, as I told you, we were and we are always to sit down and to negotiate. We are in favor of diplomacy, but it should be meaningful, serious negotiations and not ultimatums. Because what we have seen so far from the West and from Ukraine, including this infamous 10-point peace plan from Zelensky, this is in fact a capitulation of Russia. And we are ready to negotiate on how the goals and the aims of our special military operation could be implemented in a peaceful way. And they can be implemented. We have no doubt about it. So they can be achieved either militarily or they can be achieved peacefully. Of course, we prefer a peaceful solution, and as I told you, we were very close to this in March and in April, and Ukrainians themselves were ready to undertake certain obligations that would actually remove the problem that was behind the beginning of our special military operation. But it was not in the interests of the West. The West now has very big profit from new weapons. The Western consortiums that are dealing with arms are having enormous gains. They have the testing ground for new weaponry. They have very big economic interests. The United States has big interests in weakening Europe, in supplying it with its liquefied natural gas, which is much more expensive than the Russian one. So there are a lot of interests at stake. The only interest that is not at stake is that of Ukrainian people. Nobody is thinking about them in the West. It is a mere pawn, a mere instrument in their geopolitical struggle against Russia. And this is the real tragedy, the tragedy that President Zelensky wants to conceal from its people 1 year after the beginning of our special military operation, that he actually doesn't care about national interests of his country. All he cares about is about Western interests in weakening Russia and in maybe defeating Russia if they are successful.
Okay.
That's all it is about.
All right. We've been speaking with Dmitri Polyanskiy, the first Deputy Permanent Representative Russia to the UN. And I want to thank you once again, Ambassador, and we will have you back. Okay?
Thank you, Randy.
All right.
All the best to your listeners. Thank you. Bye.